Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, October 23rd, 2015. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. I'm going to be moving a little fast, trying to get through it all. The lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. We've got a caller waiting online, but I want to get started on some of these stories. Obviously, the big news today, Hillary had her testimony before the Benghazi committee yesterday. And before I get into that, I want to remind you all of that scummy little trick the corporate media pulled following the Democratic debates, when all of the online polls, including those on the corporate media, had shown Hillary had lost the debate, and the corporate media yanked their own polls and started broadcasting headlines that Hillary was the clear victor in the Democratic debate, because they knew the vast majority of the American people had not actually watched the debate, and they could get away with saying, Hillary is the winner, you will bow down and worship her. And they're doing the same thing again. The corporate media understands the vast majority of Americans were not able to actually watch the Benghazi hearing yesterday, so they're just going to say, Hillary won, like it's a sporting event. Hillary has won, Hillary has won. No, this was all about how 4 people got killed at the consulate in Benghazi. It's not a basketball contest. They're treating it like one. Hillary is the victor. Give me an H, give me an I, give me an L. They're out there trying to do that right now. So they're trying to bamboozle all the Americans. So Hillary won. That's all you need to know. Don't think about anything else here. Anybody who actually watched the hearing understands Hillary admitted responsibility for Benghazi. She excused her failure by saying she simply wasn't paying attention to all the memos being sent by Ambassador Stevens requesting increased security. It's her job to do that. It's hardly a sterling endorsement of her skills to be a president. Hillary's defense, I'm clueless. I wasn't reading the memos. That's it. These things happen. I was too busy, doing favors for all the donors to the Clinton Foundation. There's only so many hours in the day. What do you want from me? So not exactly a pivotal display of executive ability there. Now, we ran a poll at WhatReallyHappened.com. How did Hillary's testimony change your opinion of her? As of the last time I checked, let's see, the opinion was, better 3%, worse 66%, unchanged 31%. That's the numbers we had last time I checked on that. And I'm not the only person thinking this isn't really going to change the opinion of anybody. There's an article over at MSNBC. Will the Benghazi hearing change anyone's opinion? And they're saying the polls are showing no. The Democrats, liberals still love her. They don't care what she's done. She could slaughter puppies on the front lawn of her house in Chappaqua, and it wouldn't change anybody's opinion about her. We're going to put her in because she's a woman, and it's time we had a woman president, and that's all that really matters. And let us be honest here. A lifetime spent ducking the consequences for someone's actions does not qualify that someone to be the president. It just means they're slick. Remember, that was her husband's name, Slick Willie. He always skates. He gets out of it here. Now, a big issue that was raised during the Benghazi hearings was the security at the consulate. And the fact that Ambassador Stevens had sent memo after memo after memo after memo requesting more security. Clinton tried to put the blame on him. He's responsible. He was responsible for his own decisions. It's not my job. Yeah, it is, because anything that is provided to the consulate has to be approved by the State Department. Hillary Clinton ignored 600 requests for more security in Benghazi that she just totally ignored. And her excuse is, I wasn't reading all the memos. Now, another point that was brought up was apparently Ambassador Stevens was so concerned about the security around the consulate, and he had good reason to be. We'll get into that in a little bit. He was out trying to buy additional security resources from other governments. You know, if you got an alarm you're not using anymore, I need it. How about some barricades? We need them over here. And they were asking Hillary, didn't that signal that the ambassador was seriously concerned about his safety? And Clinton just smiles and says, well, I admire his entrepreneurial spirit. He was out there being creative to try and solve the problem. It wasn't his problem to solve. It was Hillary's problem to solve, and she did not. And Hillary Clinton admitted she broke U.S. law in Benghazi. The way she handled security for the consulate. She's admitted she broke the U.S. law. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Alan in California, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I've been listening now for a couple of months. I love your show. I don't know if you saw that in the Iowa and the current GOP for the Republicans, Ben Carson is pretty far ahead. 27-20. Have you seen that yet?
Yeah, I saw that, and, it's scratching my head a little bit because, Trump has been way out in front all along, and then all of a sudden, there's this sudden snap reversal, and I have to tell you, it makes me suspicious. And I'm getting a strong sense that we're seeing a replay of Richard Nixon's creep playbook. And if you know anything at all about his run for a second term in office, and as a matter of fact, they're rerunning All the President's Men on cable TV. We saw it the other night. And what the committee to reelect did is they went out and they identified the one candidate they absolutely knew Nixon could beat, McGovern, and they went out and sabotaged the campaigns of every other Democratic candidate, so that Nixon could walk to the White House. And I'm getting a sense that we're seeing that again, where the Democrats are, this is their time for payback. They're going to go on out and destroy any GOP candidates that might actually be a threat to Hillary. Because
it was showing that, the women's vote was really high from Trump only had 13% and Carson had 30%. So I think that's what's really given the big push.
Well, if it's an honest poll, and remember, there's no security on polling. There isn't even really security on the actual elections, much less so on the polls here. But if they're blaming the sudden reversal of Carson and Trump on the women's vote, it's saying something very insulting about women, that they really are kind of clueless about American politics and what's going on, and they're just going to rally around, we've got to have a woman president. Which we know was a big part of Hillary's campaign. Her campaign was calling it the vagina vote. We got the women locked up. We don't need to worry about anything here. But at this point, knowing that a lot of women don't like Hillary because of the way she attacked the victims of her husband's sexual predations, I'm not sure that this poll is 100% accurate. If you look at how easy it is to rig the elections, it's got to be much easier to rig a poll.
Well, I think a lot of women are jumping from Hillary and then jumping to Ben Carson because, he's a family man, he's soft-spoken, he's very intelligent. I think there's, a lot that they like there.
Maybe. We need to look at the numbers a little more closely. We need to find out how many people were polled actually are registered Republicans, because one way to rig polls is you'll have your Democrats go on in and just station themselves where the polls are being conducted. Like I said, it's a very loosey-goosey structure. It's very easy to manipulate. So,
yeah.
And we heard just yesterday where the rank and file and the leadership of the GOP, we've got to get rid of Trump any way we can. They're so afraid of him. And he is the one GOP candidate who stands a chance at defeating Hillary. The GOP are so afraid of Trump, they're willing to give away the White House to get rid of him. That's telling you something right there. Alan, got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I just got this wonderful email from a listener. I have to read it to you. I'm a Canadian, so I can't vote in your elections anyhow, but I can tell you that among all the other people I know, I have the highest opinion of Hillary, and I think she's a money-grubbing, power-mad, psychopathic wart on the face of humanity. But again, I like to be positive about people. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Ronnie in Nevada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Thanks for taking my call. Now, the thing I got to ask you, how can you resist not letting Hillary be the Democratic presidential nominee for those precious, luscious, non-stick, toilet plunger lips. I mean, how can you resist that?
Well, that's getting a little personal, and that's kind of crossing a line here. And don't get me wrong, I have lots of reasons to not like Hillary, but the personal things, yeah, that's.
I don't like her. That's just my vivid expression of what I really think of her. I don't like her. But anyway, let me just say something real quick.
Yeah.
He just was saying that 600 memos that what this gentleman from the consulate had sent her. And then she goes, she didn't read them. She couldn't remember reading them. How many she got to read to get the point?
Well, I mean, that's the whole point. And the fact that she's out there saying, I didn't read the memos, I mean, there was this very obvious disparity in communication between the consulate and the State Department before the attack, and then all of a sudden the pile gets very, very thin. The obvious implication being there's a lot of stuff that was in those communications which has never been released, which, by the way, is a felony. And Hillary's excuses, I didn't have a computer in my office at the State Department. I did everything verbal, meetings, and all the rest of the stuff. And everybody understands that she's just lying here. And, what was going on behind the scenes is starting to leak out. That's the good thing. They can't keep a lid on it anymore.
Right, but look at this, though. If you want to talk about Teflon and slickness, okay, the Justice Department's not even going to bring any charges against Lois Lerner.
Yeah.
I mean, how slick you got to be? Well, if that's not Teflon. I mean, this whole thing, charge after charge after charge, and yet you don't have one Republican in that Congress that's got the guts to stand up and tell the truth and say how it is. They have all these committees. I don't even know why they have them. Nothing even comes from it other than a bunch of gobbledygook. And they're not even getting to the bottom of the problem, which is...
they're not. We understand this was a limited hangout. And let's face it, if you want to talk about a total waste of time, putting Hillary under oath is a total waste of time. It's got absolutely no impact on anything that she's going to say.
Yeah, it is. Well, anyway, Mike, I appreciate you letting me take the time to express my opinion. You have a wonderful day, and I enjoy your show.
All right, well, listen, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here and get on back to the news. Now, here is another moment from Hillary where she's on the attack against the Benghazi Committee. How dare they intrude into her very, very busy life with all this nonsense. And she made this amazing comment, I've lost much more sleep over this than any of you have. And then, of course, one of the emails recovered from her private server shows her missing President Obama's very first daily intelligence briefing on the attack on the Benghazi consulate because she slept in till 10:45 in the morning. So, and the corporate media is going to say, oh, she won. Absolutely, she won. Don't look any further. You don't need to know. All righty. Now then, another revelation that came out, and this one has prompted quite a bit of anger among numerous people, including the families of the victims, because it came out in the hearings that, yes, indeed, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama knew this was a terrorist attack right from the very beginning. They communicated that to the government of Egypt. Hillary sent an email to Chelsea. And what did they tell you, the American people? Oh, it was a spontaneous, unplanned demonstration against this video. Innocence of Muslims that just got completely out of control. They lied to you. They lied, they lied, they lied, they lied, they lied. I'm going to keep on hitting that until finally the American people sit up and say, I'm getting tired of being lied to by this government. And what else have they been lying about? So, they knew it was a terror attack. Ambassador Stevens had been screaming for security that was ignored. The attack happened. 4 people got killed. The next obvious question which pointedly was not asked by the Benghazi Committee, was why the fact that this was a terror attack concealed from the American people. Look at the pattern of the U.S. governments. They love terror attacks. They're very useful for the U.S. government to justify its aggression against other countries. So much so that the FBI has been caught time and time and time again setting up totally innocent patsies for newsworthy arrests. So why did they not want you to know this was a terror attack on the Benghazi consulate? Why this particular target? Maybe to hide the question of just why the terrorists attacked that particular target. Now, it is already well established that the consulate in Benghazi was a hub for running guns and shoulder-fired missiles from Libya to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. You were told these weapons in Libya were being destroyed. They were not. They were being given to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, our declared enemies in the war on terror. I think that qualifies as treason. And obviously, the White House has a strong motive to not want people poking around that little bit of information. But more recently, Paula Broadwell, the biographer/lover of former CIA Director David Petraeus, blew the lid off another secret buried inside that consulate. It was one of the CIA's clandestine torture dungeon. And that means the attack may very well have been a rescue mission to free Libyans who were being tortured by the CIA. And that also is something the White House does not want you to be thinking about. Oh, it was a spontaneous protest brought about by this Innocence of Muslims video, and absolutely, that was all. There's no more to say about it. And needless to say, the victims' families are furious with Hillary and her statements, knowing now that all along, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama knew it was a terror attack and lied to the American people about this silly little trailer. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, Representative Jim Jordan got in Hillary's face over this little issue of just what happened to the consulate in Benghazi. Because Hillary's emails clearly show that she was communicating with the government of Egypt, with Chelsea, and other selected individuals that they knew all along this was an intentional, planned terror attack. But remember, Hillary and Obama and all of the corporate media spent weeks telling you, oh, it was a spontaneous protest over this horrible movie, The Innocence of Muslims, which turned out actually not to exist. They had a trailer hastily edited from somebody else's movie, and they put it out there, and that was it. They lied to you. They lied to you. They lied to you. And when you're out there talking to people who did not see Hillary's testimony, and they're believing the corporate media that she has emerged victorious and unscathed, you say, no, they're lying to you. Same corporate media told you Saddam had nuclear weapons, humans are warming the planet, etc. ad infinitum. They're lying again. Hillary has admitted to lying to you, the American people, and blaming this video for what they knew at the time was a deliberate attack. Now then, Hillary had one little slip-up, which the corporate media obediently ignored, and basically implied that Ambassador Chris Stevens was engaged in securing shoulder-fired missiles in Libya to transfer to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. Now, the independent media picked up on this. This is all over the independent media. Story out of Investment Watch blog. The Benghazi illegal CIA arms transfer hidden from public no longer. Now, shortly after the U.S. went into Libya and killed Gaddafi, got rid of the golden hour, got rid of their state bank, put Libya's oil back on the world market for the U.S. dollar, Obama announced they were going to have a program that was going to go all over Libya and destroy Libya's huge stockpile of dangerous surface-to-air missiles. And as it turns out, these missiles were not destroyed. They were basically stolen from Libya and sent over to Syria. That is a big scandal lurking behind the email server scandal. Remember what I said? The email server itself is our current version of the stained blue dress. You're supposed to stop looking at that and not look beyond to see what's really going on. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Peter in California, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hey, Michael, it's Peter from Los Angeles, and I'm just calling up because I watched a good deal of the Hillary testimony, and for those in the audience who are old enough to remember, my ideal outcome to that would have been, remember at the end of Perry Mason when he always under cross-examination would make the guy get up and shout and confess, hysterically. And I was hoping that Hillary would get up and confess and then be in such a tizzy that she would drop dead.
Well, I don't know about the drop dead part here, but what she did do is get up and high five all her friends and smile, and she'd gotten away with it again. Her record of getting away with crimes and corruptions and the rest of it is unbroken. She's batting 1,000 at defeating the forces of law, order, and justice.
Well, Michael, there's the list, and by the way, the thing about prisoners and torture being done at the Benghazi location actually came out about a year and a half ago or something, and I remember when it originally came out, and nobody said much about it, but I remember hearing somebody say it's against some specific law in the United States that you cannot keep anybody in custody, any prisoners in custody, or jail anybody at a U.S. consulate. There's a specific law that addresses that.
Well, now, Broadwell is saying that the actual torturing was being done at the CIA annex, which was technically off the consulate property.
Well, that may be splitting hairs and may not be.
It is splitting hairs. I mean, it's still an international war crime. Torture is illegal under all kinds of treaties and law and U.S. law and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. I mean, that's the reality. They have gone so far beyond the limits of law and morality and ethics. I mean, they're war criminals. They're all war criminals.
And Michael, we know for a fact that they were illegally transferring arms to people that are on our terrorist organizations, which if you and I even had those on our Rolodex, we could go to jail for. But including Stinger missiles, which is particularly sensitive. We know that they lied about the film, the ridiculous Muslim film. They lied to the U.S. Public, although they talked to Egypt about it. There's so many. We know that they ignored all the warnings about security. There's so much that's wrong. Torture, illegal prisons, and yet there the Democrats were. And I love some of the questions the Democrats were asking Hillary, and they'd be questions like, Hillary, what do you think is the very greatest thing that you ever did?
Yeah.
Things like that. Yeah. And of course, she pontificated for 10 minutes, using up time, and it was just incredibly. It's emblematic of just how absolutely dysfunctional and screwed we are.
Well, it's funny. After all the way the Democrats have been screaming that this was partisanship on display, and then the Democrats turned out to be more partisan than anybody else. I mean, they were obviously in there in support of Hillary. Whatever happened to the idea that Congress is supposed to be looking into checks and balances on the executive branch, because that's exactly what's going on here. The executive branch has gone off the constitutional reservation. Congress's actual duty, as defined under the Constitution, is to get them back on track, and Congress has failed its constitutional duty here. They're out there playing politics, and that's all they think about anymore. And to heck with the American people, to heck with the laws, to heck with, common decency and morals and ethics. We're just out to prove that we can win the White House next year.
Can I make two points?
Sure, real quick.
Can you hold me over, Mike?
Yeah, I can hold you over until we come on back, but you've got about a minute and a half now. Okay,
here we go. The first one is the presidency and the checks and balances. I know we've talked about this before on the air. I know you have, and and I've chimed in a time or two, but there are no longer checks and balances. The unlimited surveillance means that there's no way any president is ever going to be held to account for anything that they do, because they have everything on every representative, on every judge, on every senator. Not only that, but their grandchildren, their daughters, their wives, whatever. They have it on everybody. There's no such thing as checks and balances.
Well, yeah, they had enough to drive Biden out of the race for the White House, and Obama's just out there telling the Department of Justice, "Don't prosecute my friends, prosecute my enemies." That's why Lois Lerner got a get-out-of-jail-free card.
That's right. That's right. The other thing is, right now there's a cybersecurity information sharing act.
Yep.
It's about to be voted on, and this it's always been illegal and unconstitutional to do what they're doing.
Yeah, that's all this bill is. It's there to give a quasi-legal status to a violation of the Fourth Amendment, and industry experts say it isn't actually going to make our cyber systems any more secure. This is just a piece of paper they can wave around to say it's okay for us to spy on you now. We have defeated the Fourth Amendment. Anyway, Peter, thank you very much. Do you want to stay on?
I'd love it. There's a little more on that, but yes.
All right, well, I'm going to put you back on hold, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go right back to Peter in Los Angeles. And, Peter, you wanted to finish up.
Well, yeah, we were talking about that Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act, which, prior to all of this, when the government, the NSA and the CIA were eavesdropping on everybody, they went to the phone companies and Skype and Google and Bing and all these people, and they coerced them with threats into participating and giving up their clients' information. Now, since then, there have been numerous lawsuits against any of the companies that participated in it. What this does is this makes it legal.
No, it doesn't. It's a bluff.
Yeah, I hear you. It's certainly unconstitutional, but there's a difference between legal and unconstitutional.
No, there isn't. There isn't here because of the United States Supreme Court ruling in Marbury versus Madison. Laws repugnant to the Constitution are automatically null and void. And that's something all Americans need to keep in mind. They need to remember that. Otherwise, the government's going to get away with just passing some bill through Congress and saying, well, this takes away your right to freedom of speech. This takes away your right to keep and bear arms. This takes away your right to refuse vaccines. This takes away your right to privacy. They're not allowed to do that. It's the Bill of Rights. It's not a Bill of Suggestions.
Well, you're absolutely right about that. And I wish that Marbury versus Madison was observed by the government, but it's not.
Well, the only thing being observed by the governments are those campaign donors' checks. That's about it right now. And remember what George Bush, he called the Constitution a blankety-blank piece of paper?
Right, he did. He sure did. But when I called my congressman about this, I called both my senators and my congressman, California, Feinstein, Boxer, and my congresswoman, who was Karen Bass from L.A. At any rate, and I said, what's your position on these? And the two senators, one, Feinstein is definitely for it. Mm. Of course, everything this Gestapo she's for.
Yes.
Boxer has not declared, and neither has my congresswoman. And I said to them, what about the oath of office they took to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States? What about that don't they understand? And that this is an evisceration of our First Amendment rights and the First and the Fourth and God knows how many, constitutional amendments. But at any rate, and yet here we go. We're going to, they're going to have every phone call, everything they're just cementing it. Another mile marker down the road to Stasi Nation.
And you know what's really amazing here? Okay. It's not actually going to catch real criminals or terrorists. Because as we proved on my website, it is very easy to come up with systems of encryption. The NSA cannot break. And that means all of this spying is just on the American people to steal their business secrets, to copy off pictures of their naked wives and girlfriends or sons and daughters, depending upon the orientation of whichever NSA dweeb happens to be at the console. That's all they can do with all this authority. They're not going to get the real bad guys, because the real bad guys are going to have their own secure systems of encryption. You know, they're going to insist we all use government-approved encryption, and like the gun laws, it's only going to make law-abiding citizens more helpless, and it's not going to do a thing, you know, to the real criminals who've got the resources out there to come up with very powerful encryption that can't be broken.
Well, when I was on the phone with these staffers, I was saying, I said, these laws aren't really aimed at people like me, small fry nobodies, right? They're really aimed at people like you, staffer, you know, I said to them, because, you know, just like they did with Feinstein's and Intel committee staff about the torture stuff when they threatened them, they eavesdropped on them, threatened them. You know, if they can't get to Karen Bass, my congresswoman, maybe they can get to him through you. Maybe you guys are screwed up and they can get to him through you. Or maybe they get to him through her sister or brother or son or whatever. And so, you know, where I've got a file, I'm sure your file is on a different level. And you really ought to think about that. And if your congressman has to think about a position on the Bill of Rights, then maybe, you know, you ought to reevaluate who you're working for. And because maybe if it's just money, maybe Himmler has a position on his staff and might pay some more money.
All right.
So anyways, that's what I told them. So.
All right. Well, you know, the problem is NSA has actually been doing all this stuff all the way back to the 1980s, starting with the Echelon program. And by now, they do have the goods on all of the top judges, members of Congress. They were even spying on Obama when he was in the Congress. That certainly seems to be the reason why Chief Justice Roberts did that sudden 180 on Obamacare. He was opposed, last second, yeah, it's okay. And then he leaves the country for a week's vacation in Malta so he doesn't have to talk to the press. And look at the way, you know, Biden dropped out. Somebody was trying to say, well, he was doing it for the good of the Democratic Party. No, the good of the Democratic Party would have been best served by Biden stepping in and giving the Democrats a real shot at the White House. And, and again, we had reported even earlier in the week, Biden's advisor was saying the Hillary Clinton war machine is going to destroy you. Somebody may have sent Biden a copy of the Clinton dead bodies list, and he may have just decided that he didn't want to risk being Robert Kennedy'd.
Well, you know, Mike, they kill, they murder American, they torture, they can imprison indefinitely, they surveil. There's no accountability. There are no checks and balances. If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's a freaking duck.
We're a fascist dictatorship, and it's time we all realize that and decide what we're going to do. Peter, I got to let you go. We've got one more call I need to get here before the top of the hour, so we're going to switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Hey, how you doing? Hey, the other day you mentioned the CIA guy Hamza, who was the toe terrorist who got killed. Did they find his other toe?
I have no idea, but the other story that we need to keep in mind, of course, was the revelation from Hillary's emails that the so-called mastermind of the Lockerbie bombing was a CIA asset. That's another one we have to keep out there before the eyes of the American people.
Hey, Mike, I know you probably talked about this earlier. I wasn't able to catch the beginning of your show. The new jamming system they got set up by the company called Kret.
Yes.
The Russians, it's called the Reichstag AV. This thing is like the S-400. It's never seen before. This thing has no equal, Mike.
Yeah, well, you know, it is. It's an area denial system, and it absolutely blocks anything the U.S. and NATO has. Obviously, it's been around long enough because apparently all the Russian aircraft, their radars have the correct coding, whatever is in there, where this jamming system will leave them alone.
Because if you notice, the Russians are really pulling out their latest and greatest because they got the Panzer S-1 they brought out and also the TOS, multiple flamethrower weapon.
That's their equivalent of the MLRS system.
Yeah, and these vehicles have really never been seen before outside of Russia. So this is all game changing. And, I think this is heading toward the end game, as we say, because, they would have not brought this stuff out for any other purpose.
I'm sure they have a few surprises still in reserve.
They do, Mike. They do.
Basically, what they're bringing out are the things they want to sell to other countries. It's a sales demonstration. And the things they're not willing to sell to other countries, I'm sure, are still very much under wraps.
Just like the Caliber cruise missile, which they all did hit their target, because if people just checked, they had a next day 12 more missile launch from subs that hit the targets on the in the ocean.
Yes.
So that was just propaganda by CIA. Because
the claim that they'd fallen in Iran and everything, because everybody was calling up the manufacturer of the Tomahawks and saying, we're canceling with you. We're going to buy these things from the Russians. Oh, they're not as good as you think. Really, they were showering all over Iran. And of course, both Iran and Russia said, what drugs are you people on? Anyway, Dustin, I need to let you go. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to take our top of the hour news and commercial break. And when we come on back, a lot more stuff to talk about. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And I had a lot more to go into about Hillary's testimony, but we are moving along the show. I'm going to have to jump on down. We'll probably reprise or go back to some of this stuff Monday, Tuesday of next week. But I do want to leave you with one thought about Libya. In 1967, when Gaddafi first came to power in Libya, it was one of the poorest nations in Africa. By the time he was murdered, Gaddafi had turned Libya into Africa's richest nation with the highest standard of living. Libya had the highest human development index, the lowest infant mortality, and the highest life expectancy in all of Africa. Gaddafi built these major waterworks, greened up the place. Now, after Hillary's war, and let's go ahead and call it that, Libya is a totally failed state. It's in even worse condition than it was in 1967. Western embassies have all been forced to leave. The south of Libya is a haven for ISIS terrorists, many of whom we may now safely assume are working for the United States government. The northern coast is a center of migrant trafficking. All of the neighboring countries have closed their borders. There's widespread rape, crime, assassinations, and torture. That is what the U.S. government has brought to Libya. That is what the U.S. government has brought to every country they've intervened in. That's what the U.S. government is bringing to the United States of America. By the way, a little footnote here. The federal government spent more of your tax dollars studying origami condoms and why lesbians are fat than they spent on the Benghazi inquiry. They didn't want it to go anywhere. It was a limited hangout. All right, getting on down to Syria. More Russian strikes against ISIS. Major Syrian army gains in the last 24 hours. ISIS is withdrawing in Aleppo. Syrian Hezbollah joint forces capture 2 more towns. Syrian Army Popular Forces win back more village in Homs. Syrian fighter jets stage massive air raids on Nusra. The Russian Air Force has now cut off a major supply line for ISIS by bombing a bridge over the Euphrates River. Now, Russia and Jordan have now formed a coordination center on Syrian military actions. Jordan has now gone over to Russia's point of view and said, yeah, it's time to clean this mess up. The terrorists in Syria are fleeing into Turkey in droves, and from there, presumably, up to Europe as part of the flood of refugees, and here to the United States of America. And remember, the head of the FBI has said there is no mechanism to check this flood of refugees pouring into the United States of America to see if any of them might be inclined to do something nasty here. Russia is sending humanitarian aid for the children of Syria. And apparently, and this may not be true, but there's a new video out from ISIS supposedly showing instructions how to take helium balloons, and I'm not kidding you, condoms loaded with explosives, and float them in the air in the hope that the Russian warplanes will just run into them and come crashing down. I thought the idea of a barrage balloon had kind of gone out with World War I. Now, Russia continues to bomb ISIS stations. The United States, of course, is bombing Syrian civilian power stations. And we're talking about the ones just outside Aleppo. Now, the power station was under the control of ISIS. The grid was under the control of the Syrian government. They actually had an understanding. They weren't going to wreck the civilian electric system because so many civilians depend on it. And ISIS said, we'll keep the electricity flowing to Syrian civilians. And you will leave us alone. And the Syrian government said, deal. And the U.S. came in and blew up the power stations. Now, Putin has finally taken the next inevitable step. And he's gone public saying that the United States is playing a double game over Syria, pretending to be fighting terrorists while using those terrorists as tools, as pawns, to rearrange the Middle East. And of course, it gets a lot harder when the American people and the people of the world realize that's what Washington, D.C. has been doing. So Putin has called them out on it. Putin has also made a comment very much in line with something I have been saying, that if the U.S. escalates this situation any further, global war is likely, and it will probably go nuclear. And I've been saying that for a very long time. The United States cannot prevail against Russia in a conventional war. Syria has already proven that to everybody. So if the U.S. goes to war with Russia, on the day the leadership in Washington, D.C. realizes they cannot win conventionally, that is when they'll start turning those little brass keys in the missile silos, and it's going to be a really bad day for anybody not wearing 2 million sunblock. And Putin is out there saying, this is a real danger. And remember, for all the talk about Iraq's nuclear weapons and Syria's nuclear weapons and Iran's nuclear weapons, remember, in all of human history, there's only been one nation that actually used nuclear weapons of mass destruction against the civilians of another country, and that is the United States of America. Now, with the whistle being blown by members of Turkey's parliament, it is now clear that Seymour Hersh has been vindicated on his report that the sarin gas attack at Ghouta was a false flag, orchestrated by Turkish intelligence and blamed on Bashar al-Assad in order to give President Obama a means to tell the American people, oh, well, Assad has crossed the red line. He used sarin gas on his own people and launched a military invasion. And it didn't happen because the claim that Assad was gassing his own people fell apart. Because Americans have become very skeptical. They're not the naive, trusting fools that we all were back in the 1950s and 1960s, and I'll cop to it as well. I used to believe the bovine excrement coming out of ABC, NBC, and CBS when I was young, innocent, and naive. But things are very, very different. And we had Obama and we had John Kerry out there saying Assad is gassing his own people with sarin gas. And of course we'd say, why did he do it? Why would Assad gas his own Alawite supporters with a banned chemical weapon on the very day the United Nations chemical weapons inspectors showed up virtually in front of them? And nobody could come up with an excuse. And because of that lack of a motive, that gaping giant hole in the official story, it fell apart. Now they've got another giant gaping hole. As you know, up in Iraq, a U.S. soldier has been killed supposedly on this rescue mission. We're going to rescue these 70 hostages. And now, of course, Obama has painted himself into a corner. How do you explain a U.S. soldier being killed in Iraq on the battlefield if we're not officially supposed to be in combat there? Just think about that one for a little tiny bit. The lies are contradicting themselves so much. I actually need a smaller egg timer now. This is a 3-minute. I need a 1-minute. That's how fast they're falling. Russian diplomat is out there saying that 3,500 ISIS fighters have now gone into Afghanistan. I'm sure the U.S. is going to say, well, see, we need to keep our troops on the ground there. We might see the government of Afghanistan do what Syria did, what Iraq is talking about doing. So long, Americans, you're really not very good at keeping these terrorists under control. We're going to invite the Russians in here again. Dear Russians, come to Afghanistan. We're sorry we kicked you out back during Charlie Wilson's war. We should have stayed with you all along. Now, over in Ukraine, their foreign minister has laid a big old bear trap for Russia politically. When we come back from these commercials, I'm going to explain exactly how that is put together. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, over in Kiev, the Ukrainian foreign minister has issued a statement that deploying United Nations peacekeepers in the Donbass to enforce the Minsk Accords is impossible without Russia's agreement. Do you see the political bear trap that is being laid? If Russia says nothing, then Russia are obstructing the United Nations. If Russia says we're fine with it, it'll be held up as proof Russia has been in Donbass all along. See how the game gets played here? The foreign minister is also saying that Ukraine is not going to take military action against Russia for Crimea. Which, again, they're still coming from the position, Russia stole Crimea from us. No, actually, the Crimean people just didn't want to be your slaves. Apparently, up in the Donetsk Republic, there's a report of an armed clash going on. Heavy, weaponized battle. Apparently, it's between two Ukrainian army units. The commanders got into an argument with each other and literally declared war on each other. Alcohol is reported to have been involved in the starting of this. Oh my, the fog of war. The fog of vodka, as it were. Another little article coming on out. This is from RINF.com. Started over at antiwar.com. And it's basically talking about this netherworld of cyber mercenaries who are operating out on the very cutting edge of the law regarding cyber malice, because the U.S. government and the military do not really get involved in any kind of bad behavior on the Internet unless it causes physical injury, death, or damage in the real world. And so there's a whole group of cyber mercenaries who are out there, and they're ruining lives. They're organized. They'll call up bosses and say, this person is a traitor. They'll get people fired. And because it doesn't cross the line into injury, death, or damage, they're being left alone. And right now, Ukraine and a lot of other governments are hiring these people to send them out to cause trouble for anybody in the independent media. And by using these cyber mercenaries, it gives them plausible deniability. We have no idea who it is who is DOSing your server. It certainly isn't anybody we know. On a larger scale, we're seeing more and more articles like this one that was out of Washington's blog. Putin has just put an end to the Wolfowitz Doctrine. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about, the Wolfowitz Doctrine is at the core of the neocon aggression across the globe. It came out of the Project for the New American Century, which was this Washington think tank whose agenda was that following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States was the world's only remaining superpower, and we might as well act like one and have a century of military conquest and domination of the rest of planet Earth, which is going along really swell right now. And pointing out that Putin is not going to allow any more regime changes in nations they are friends with. And I'll tell you where they really blew it. Because Russia was on board, everybody was a friend until the day Putin took away control of Russia's private central bank. Now, Russia's central bank is still privately owned. But Putin said the government is going to start managing the Russian currency. Not a bunch of private bankers. And that was the day when Russia went from good friend to very bad evil person and was put on the top of the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list. Another article on the same theme from SOT.net, Dr. Strangelove is naked. Putin's campaign in Syria smashes the empire's plans for the greater Middle East. And it really has. Because the U.S. has lost the military initiative, and more importantly, they've lost the propaganda initiative. Nobody is believing anything they say anymore about why our sons and daughters have to risk life and limb going into all these different countries. Oh, we're after terrorists. No, you're not. You're after control of oil revenues. Now, the Pentagon's 2016 defense budget, which Obama has apparently just vetoed, includes a line item, $1.6 billion for a proxy army against Russia. So you can see where this is going. By the way, Obama vetoed that bill. They're basically putting it out that, this is denying pay raises to the troops. And, yeah, I think they deserve a little more money and a little more benefits. So they deserve to be taken care of by the VA. But the real issue here is that Obama wants Congress to abandon the spending limits that were imposed in an earlier administration. Obama wants the limits gone. He wants to be able to borrow and spend and borrow and spend and borrow and spend and borrow and spend. And that's going to be the big fight over the budget and over the debate on just how much they're going to raise the debt ceiling. They're not even talking about the possibility of not raising the debt ceiling. Everybody says, yeah, we got to borrow more. The argument is over how much. More about that later. Iraq apparently shot down an ISIS drone in the northeastern province of Kirkuk earlier today. And the United Arab Emirates has acknowledged more of their army have been killed in Yemen. So that's not going as smoothly as they would like. U.S. satellite imagery has revealed the expansion and enlargement of a, up until now, secret U.S. drone base in Africa. So now, along with sending out drones to kill tall people or people that we just look ugly in the Middle East, now we're going to do it in Africa. Now let's talk about Benjamin Netanyahu, because he has really caused some serious problems, not just for himself, but for Israel, with this idiotic attempt to say that the Palestinian Mufti was the origin of the Nazi Germany plan to exterminate all the Jews. And once all the laughter has faded away, Israel's left with a question. What do you make of the Jewish state having a Holocaust revisionist for a prime minister? And of course, the upside of that is if it's okay for Netanyahu to revise the history of the Holocaust, then the rest of us are perfectly okay to do it as well. Now, the granddaughter of the Palestinian Mufti, which has been maligned by Benjamin Netanyahu, is saying, there is just so much wrong with Netanyahu's comments, but she says it's actually going to help the Palestinian cause because of how ridiculous the comment was. And people are now realizing Israel lies to demonize the Palestinians. There's no other way to put it. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, Netanyahu has really jumped the shark with this story that Hitler didn't want to exterminate the Jews, but was induced to do it by the Mufti of Palestine, directly contradicting Israel's early propaganda that there was no such thing as Palestine or Palestinians. Now, as we pointed out on my website, there are photos of Adolf Hitler with all kinds of world leaders. President Hoover, King Edward. Doesn't mean that these people were closet Nazis or part of the Holocaust. The meeting between Hitler and the Mufti was a private one. There is no transcript. There is no historical record of what they talked about. And when Netanyahu was pressed for where he got this information, he refuses to say. The fact that it is a bald-faced lie is obvious to everybody. No amount of political correctness or Israel support or even just silent politeness is going to get anybody to say, well, yeah, maybe, yeah, no. And it's causing all kinds of problems, not just for Netanyahu. The U.S. Congress was getting ready to pass a bill declaring that the blame for the current violence in Israel it's entirely the fault of the Palestinians. They're the ones doing the incitement. It's all their fault. And of course, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations had made that same statement, saying, this is not a cycle of violence. We're doing absolutely nothing. It's all the fault of the Palestinians. And Netanyahu has basically shot them both down. Adding fuel to the fire is Rabbi Ray Benzion Mutsafi, who has gone public at the Israeli news website Walla, saying that killing Palestinians is the religious duty of all Jews. That even if they're on the ground and helpless, you should kill them because they may stand up again. And if Netanyahu wants to really find links to the Nazis, he needs to look closer to home because, amazingly enough, the Jerusalem Post has broke a long-standing Israeli taboo by writing about the 1941 link between former Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir's Stern Gang and Nazi Germany. So apparently the Mufti is now off the hook. As you know, former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak is being sued over Israel's attack on the Mavi Marmara and the execution of a U.S. citizen, with apparently the approval or tolerance of the U.S. government, but the parents are not going along with that. Let's grab a couple of real quick phone calls here. We're going to talk to Keith in Montana. Aloha, Keith. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, you added something to my list there. I was thinking of the Havara Agreement. If you read on it, it says that the Zionist entities there in full collaboration or agreement with the Nazis were the ones that bartered for Palestine. Anyway, the reason I called Mike was I was watching some of this theater on this Trey Gowdy and Hillary Clinton and a few of the other players like that. And I was thinking, when I listened to Trey Gowdy talking about those 4 poor Americans that died, I was thinking, well, what about the Downing Street memo and all these other blood documents that have surfaced that killed almost 5,000 Americans? Why is there no interest in that?
Well, because the American people might stand up and say, you know, maybe this war thing isn't such a really good idea, especially since we were all lied to about the reasons for it. I mean, that right now is the U.S. government's top propaganda task, how to keep the American people on board. And obviously, at this point, I think they've given up on the people who are here on the Internet and the independent media, and they're just totally focusing on Americans who are too busy to actually watch hearings, and presumably too busy to actually go on out on the Internet and find out for themselves what's going on. And that right now appears to be where they're focusing their propaganda efforts.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can carry this over. Look at the 300,000 veterans' deaths, the 22 days that more that commit suicide.
How about the 5 million people total who have died in all of this stuff so far? We're getting into World War II numbers now in terms of the death rates.
Yeah, you know, I just like, people try to minimize everything like that. And it's like, I always put out that list, like on Twitter there, the list of countries the United States has attacked. But out of all those countries, which one has ever attacked the United States?
Not one.
Yeah, the one. So, all right, thanks, Mike. That's been clear, okay?
All right, thanks an awful lot here. We're going to switch over to Mo in Florida. Aloha, Mo. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Michael, for taking my call. I have a comment about your show, and then actually 2 comments. First of all, this is not a particular item or anything, but just generally speaking, I've been following you for years. And, Ron Paul, the whole revolutionist, around 2000, started following all this stuff. And, anybody that knows this, when you first got on the Internet, you said anything negative against Israel or even the military, you would just get slammed with. And now, sometimes things are so incremental, we don't realize how much of a change there is. But if you go on and say something negative against Israel, I don't mean negative to be negative, but against, who we're talking about, not the Israeli people, but the mafia type, Mossad government.
Yeah, we're talking about the government. We're not talking about the Jewish people as a whole. We're not talking about their ethnicity or their religion. We're talking about the behaviors of a small group of people who are the government. But, Israel, especially now, they're out there trying to wield their might still as much as possible. There's a story coming out of the Jewish News in Great Britain celebrating that this labor counselor got fired for posting comments on their own private social media about links between Israel and 9/11, and links between Israel and ISIS, which is now documented. They caught that Israeli general in Iraq who said, yeah, we're helping them. But they're still out there. They're still Israel's supporters are still out there with a campaign of terror trying to shut everybody up. It's not going to work. There's too many people out there who know what's going on.
Yeah, that's my exact point. I was saying that, when you used to post anything, I don't mean, like I said, negative, like you were saying, against the Jewish people, or I have friends that are Jewish, and there's nothing to do with it. But now there's so many more people that come online and back you up. It's so incremental, like I was saying, that you don't realize sometimes the tide is already in. And I mean, because of guys like you that have the guts to stand up for what is truth, this is the other thing I was going to say is a scary day for me is when I can't get through to your phone. That's a scary day. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know.
Right?
I know what you're saying here.
Yeah,
but
that's that's the time to get the provisions out, and the lock and load because the shit's hit the fan.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I have noticed in recent weeks. Israel's online supporters, the megaphonies and stuff, they seem to be losing their enthusiasm for going on out and screaming at people, and it's almost like they're on autopilot. You're an anti-Semite, you're a Jew hater, you're an anti-Semite, you're a Jew hater, you're an anti-Semite, you're a Jew hater, I'm going out for a bagel. And the enthusiasm is gone. And I think the reasoning is because, calling somebody anti-Semite and Jew hater doesn't carry the shock value it used to. They burned it out, using it too much. And of course, we have that wonderful video from Democracy Now! Where a former member of the Knesset admitted to Amy Goodman, screaming at people that they're anti-Semites is a trick to get them to shut up about things that Israel really cannot explain away. Okay?
Thank you, Michael. Keep up the good work.
As long as I can. Thank you for the call. And we're going to take a break for commercials. When we come on back, we're going to pick up some of our science and health stories. Hurricane Patricia. Ooh, I'm worried about those people. It's going to be ugly. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And one final comment about all this stuff coming out of Israel. We know all governments lie to their people, but Israel has raised it to a fine art. And going on back to this thing where Israel, and this started with Golda Meir, there's no such thing as Palestine. There's no such thing as Palestinians. They never existed. It was just made up to annoy us poor Israelis here. If you go back to the Balfour Declaration, which was the beginning of the founding of the modern state of Israel, it says right in there, we're going to carve it out of Palestine. So, anyway, let's talk a little bit about science and health. We're coming up on the top of the hour when the Lady Claire is going to join us. Obviously, all eyes on Hurricane Patricia. It's a Category 5 record-setting hurricane heading for the Mexican coast. And I've been along that part of the coast. Their building codes aren't that good. And this is going to get really, really ugly. And, of course, in typical fashion, everybody's trying to take advantage of the hurricane. The carbon Nazis are out there saying, see, this proves there's human-caused global warming. It's all your fault that the hurricane is there. Netanyahu's out there saying the Palestinians made Hurricane Patricia. And Hillary Clinton is saying, what difference does it make at this point? And for those of you who emailed and asked, Hurricane Olaf, which is another big hurricane east of Hawaii, is moving away from us. We're not going to have any difficulty from them. Now, you know that they've got this horrible situation in St. Louis where there's a subterranean fire at a landfill that they can't get to, they can't put it out. It is 300 meters away from an old nuclear waste disposal site left over from the U.S. love affair of giant mushroom clouds. And now it turns out there's another one out in Nevada. A radioactive waste dump fire near Las Vegas. Ooh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? We'd better keep an eye on airborne radiation. May not be as easy because the EPA is confirming 99 of the 135 beta radiation sensors in the RadNet system have been shut off. So, my fellow Americans, you're on your own. Thank you. Good night. Another quick story here. Not too long ago, there was a big stink regarding this 12-year-old Amish girl whose parents did not want to subject to chemotherapy for her cancer. And there was a big stink in Ohio where the state government was going to come in and take this girl from her parents and take her to the hospital and force her to undergo chemotherapy, which we know is very toxic, very damaging, very often can bring the cancer back worse than it was before. The Amish girl fled out of the jurisdiction. And as of today, confirmed by the Cincinnati, Cleveland Clinic, MRIs and blood work, she is cancer-free. No cancer whatsoever. And of course, the cancer establishment, they're just furious. We can't allow this. People curing their cancer without chemo and radiation. We'll go broke out here. We need more cancer patients. Somebody go out and set fire to a nuclear waste disposal site or something. We need more business in here. Now today, over at the CDC, the Centers for Disease Profitability, they're having a big protest, the Rally for Truth about vaccines. And all of this has grown out of the admission by Dr. William Thompson, one of the authors of the CDC study which claimed to prove there was no link between the MMR vaccine and autism. And he came out and said it was a fraudulent report. The data was cherry-picked to support the pre-desired conclusion to protect the vaccine makers and keep their profits up. And, so what if there's an epidemic of autism? We've just created a whole new autistic Muppet on Sesame Street so all those autistic children can feel cool and feel good about what's happened to them. They really did that on Sesame Street. They now have a Muppet character who's autistic, which right there tells you how widespread this problem has become. Little humorous video, how the drug companies make vaccines, and it's kind of fun to watch, but they make a very interesting point Americans need to keep in mind. When you go to the supermarket and you get a bag of Cheetos or soft drink or any junk food, they have the list of ingredients right on that package required by law. And you're just eating that stuff. Vaccines that you are shooting into your bloodstream directly past all the body's natural defense systems, oh, no, you're not allowed to know what's in there. Ooh, can't let you have that. Now, over in Great Britain, there has been a move there to use their equivalent of the Freedom of Information Act to pry loose documents about the vaccine programs there. Here in the United States, there's been similar efforts to use the Freedom of Information Act, which have all been blocked, including by a move by the U.S. government to redefine the Freedom of Information Act to allow corporations to simply declare embarrassing documents as non-existent. But what they found in the documents coming out of Great Britain, for 30 years, the British government knew the vaccines weren't working, knew that the vaccines cause the diseases they're supposed to prevent. They are hazardous, especially to children. They colluded and conspired to lie to the public, and they worked to block safety studies conducted by independent groups. These are the exact same vaccines that are now mandated to children here in the United States of America, especially out in California. But go ahead, shoot up your kids with all this toxic stuff. Hey, we got that autistic Muppet. They'll feel good about themselves for being autistic because they've got their own star on Sesame Street here. Now, a Johns Hopkins scientist has gone public, issued a blistering report on the influenza vaccines in the British Medical Journal. This is a real peer-reviewed serious journal. It's not one of these fake ones that make their money publishing anything for a fee. Peter Doshi, PhD, charges that although the vaccines are being pushed on the public in unprecedented numbers, they are less effective and cause more side effects than is claimed by the Centers for Disease Control and Profitability. The study also that underlie the CDC's policy of encouraging most people to get a yearly flu shot are low-quality studies that do not, in fact, substantiate the official claims. They're lying. It's all driven by money. Now then, remember the horrible scandal over Homon Square? This black site where suspects were taken. No paper record, no phone call, no lawyer, no Miranda, nothing, and they were tortured. Apparently, there is at least one, possibly two more. Another Homon Square type black site for the police to use has been discovered in Illinois, and another is suspected in Indiana. The U.S. now has torture centers for the American people. If they can't find the evidence that you committed the crime they want to send you to jail for, they'll just beat it out of you. And it is getting a little bit crazy. Up in New Hampshire, a man was pepper sprayed, tased, and arrested for resisting arrest, all because he was sitting in his own car on a public street, and the police decided the man was not in the area for legitimate purposes. In other words, the police just said, I don't think you've got a good reason to be here. Well, you really don't know until he commits a crime. What if he's just got tired? You know, if you're driving a long distance and you get tired and you're fatigued to the point of possibly being at risk for an accident, what do? You pull on over, you take a nap. And apparently in New Hampshire, the live free or die state, you can be pepper sprayed, tased, and arrested for being in your own car on a public street, and the police don't understand why you would want to be at that particular location. A popular 31-year-old church drummer waiting for a tow truck near his broken car was killed by a plainclothes officer, fired 6 shots into him. The official story is the drummer resisted arrest. This guy's in plain clothes, no badge, no uniform, no lights on the car. Maybe he thought he was being robbed. Maybe he was being robbed. There's the music. We've got to take a break for news and commercials. Back with the Lady Claire after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And for those of you watching over the BAM user video feed, the gorgeous creature sitting behind me is the lovely Lady Claire, who joins us on occasional Fridays with her unique perspective on the world. Before we let her get started, though, I just have to talk about that story we just heard on the news break, where a batch of drugs to be used for lethal injection has been seized because they're not approved for use on humans. It's not like anybody's going to be worried about the safety of these. They're planning on using it to kill people. Talk about government absurdity. I couldn't stop laughing there. All right, Claire, what is your first topic?
Well, I thought this painfully ironic. Germany is going to deport refugees in military cargo planes. Now, this week, the Bild newspaper reported that the German government plans to use military aircraft to deport tens of thousands of refugees whose requests for asylum have been denied. According to the paper, the government is planning to use C-160 military transports to deport nearly 200,000 people who've been declared by the German state to be economic migrants and therefore ineligible for asylum. Michael, where the darned heck are they going to bring these people to? And is there any assurance that these military planes aren't going to get shot up or shot off?
Well, if these are economic migrants, then they're not. What that is saying is they're not fleeing a war zone. And under German law, refugee status is conferred only upon those people who are actually fleeing a conflict zone. But at this point, I mean, only a few weeks ago, Angela Merkel was out there saying, we're going to take them all. You know, we're not racist anymore here in Germany. We're just going to welcome everybody. And it provoked such a huge backlash in Germany and pretty much every other country that's dealing with this. She's had to reverse course. And they're starting with the ones who do not meet the legal definition of a refugee. And, I mean, they're talking about building a wall to keep these people out. This attempt to blur all the world's populations together to create a borderless world is blowing up in their face. It could actually fracture the European Union, even worse than the economic predations of the private central bankers.
If I were one of those economic migrants, quote unquote, I would be scared to death that those planes may not make it down safely. And if they do, their lives may also be forfeit.
Well, again, in theory, these are people who didn't come from an active war zone and are not going back to an active war zone. I think more than likely what we're going to see is since they left their homes may not be there to go back to. Other people have moved in, or they bought it, or before they left, they sold what they had, and they're going back to a worse situation than they had before they started. But don't forget, these people were being encouraged to migrate. They were being lured. They were being given promises that if they got to Germany or they got to the United States, they'd get a free car and a high-def TV and all the rest of it, all of which was a complete fiction. This was an attempt, literally, to destroy the cultural, regional identity of these targeted nations, Germany, France, all of Europe, all of the United States of America, and it has instead provoked a surge in nationalistic feeling in all of these countries.
Yeah, it's really a shame, even if they are, quote-unquote, economic migrants, that they got so lured and they got so lied to that they made this horrible pilgrimage and now have to go back.
Well, whoever set this up, and it does look like it was coming out of the United Nations, because we had that United Nations official went on record saying national borders are imaginary lines. It's time to get rid of them. One planet. Nobody has a border except, of course, Israel. They're exceptional. They get a border. But it's all blurred together. We're going to have Mexico living in the United States and the United States living in Canada, and they're all blurred together, and it's just one population of mutts and one common clay and one private central bank to rule them all.
Yeah, but of course Israel can choose what its borders are at any given point in time because it's never made a firm demarcation of those borders, right?
Yeah, they draw their borders on the map with dry erase marker.
Yeah, or an Etch-a-Sketch.
Yes.
Apparently the U.S. is adding planes to Turkey and mulls a no-fly zone in Syria. And what has happened has been that 12 more U.S. warplanes were deployed to Turkey today. Part of what officials called routine rotations, yeah, sure, I'll believe that, for the ongoing bombing of Syria and Iraq. The planes that have been deployed are the A-10 Thunderbolts, designed as close air support for ground troops and are being planned for use backing Arab and Kurdish militants on the ground. I'm seeing that you're laughing. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, well, I'm laughing because it was only a couple of months ago the Pentagon was saying it's time to get rid of the A-10 Warthog. It's had its day. We need a brand new purpose-built ground support aircraft, and now they're having to put them back in service. And the idea of this being rotations may not be that much of a stretch because what we're hearing is that America's current fleet of warplanes, they're hangar queens. They're on the ground more than they are in the air.
Hangar queens, I love it.
The F-15, that's an actual Air Force term. The F-15 can only fly about half the time. They're just having to do this maintenance. And by the way, it's not military. I want to go far afield here and share a story. We have a friend who is visiting us here on Oahu. She used to live here. Then she moved to the mainland, and she came back for a visit. She left was it East Coast? No.
It was San Jose.
Okay, she was leaving from San Jose, California. Her flight was delayed for 9 hours because a hydraulic component on her aircraft failed, and the nearest spare part was San Francisco. And that tells you how stretched all of this stuff is.
Yeah. And apparently this new deployment comes amid reports of a serious debate going on in the administration on a dramatic buildup of the war in Syria aimed at spiting Russia for its own anti-ISIS war. And apparently Secretary of State John Kerry is said to lead for the push for a show of force, including declaring a no-fly zone in northern Syria and attempting to block Russia from the area militarily. Mike, I just so much want to get some of our wonderful Kona coffee over to this man and very gently shake his shoulders and say, wakey, wakey.
I think he's had too much coffee or too many antidepressants. But John,
heavenly Ned.
This was the guy who first became famous by speaking out against the Vietnam War, and he's out there saying, we've got to go up against those gosh darn Ruskies. Okay, John Kerry, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, here's your Dayglow orange jumpsuit, go have fun here. But yes, if the U.S. tries to impose a no-fly zone over Russia, Russia is certainly not going to agree with that, and that we're talking about air-to-air combat,
Yeah.
Russian-American planes, which could turn out to be as big a humiliation for the U.S. as the USS Donald Cook.
Yeah.
Because remember, Russia is invited to be there by the Syrian government.
Right.
The United States is not. What the U.S. is trying to call a no-fly zone amounts to a blockade of Syrian sovereign airspace. That's an act of war.
Right. And what concerns me is just because something is the most ham-fistedly, pig-headedly stupid thing the U.S. government could do right now is absolutely no guarantee they're not going to do it.
They have done some really dumb things.
Yeah.
And I don't know if
Yeah.
it's because some of those older buildings in Washington still have old plumbing with lead pipes in it,
Yep.
or because they're all high on prescription antidepressants. But the quality of thinking that has been coming out of Washington, D.C. for the last 15 years, it's very questionable.
Yeah.
And whether it's just because they're all surrounded by these parasitic sycophants who are telling the boss what they think the boss wants to hear, and that is a danger. That's what accelerated the downfall of Nazi Germany. But this idea of literally reinvading Syria and going head-to-head with the Russians, it's insanity by any reasonable definition of the word.
Yes, and apparently the State Department's view of such a move is very positive and sees it as the ultimate move to really stick it to Russia. It's proof positive that they've collectively OD'd on the Kool-Aid of their own jingoism.
Yes, very much so. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we go to Claire's next story, I have an observation I want to share with you. On the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com, we have an article, and it repeats something I have been saying. And the article appeared in Medium.com, the U.S. Navy's big mistake building tons of supercarriers. And they're talking about this idea that the U.S. government has invested insane sums of your tax money, trillions and trillions of dollars, building and rebuilding the weapons that won the last war, and not really thinking about how the battle space has changed in the 21st century. And we all know that going into World War II, U.S. military doctrine was the battleship was supreme. You know, the aircraft carrier, nice to have, but nothing could sink the battleships, even though Billy Mitchell had sunk one in the 1920s in front of some Japanese observers who were part of the party, as it were, the observing party. They were there at the guest of the U.S. government, because we were all friends back then. And that's why the U.S. was caught off guard. And then they went in and they started building the carriers. But now, of course, everything, it's the carrier and force projection and airplanes and all the rest of it. And the world has moved ahead. And I think the U.S. is going to find itself caught off guard again. And the incident with the USS Donald Cook, I think, is a good illustration of that. The embarrassment of the F-35 not even being able to outfight a 1970s vintage warplane. The F-22 still asphyxiating its pilots, Independence-class littoral ships, underarmed, under-armored, electronic systems wide open to jamming, and they're already having to pull the early ships into dry dock to replace hull plates for corrosion, like somebody forgot what zinc sacrificial anodes are for. And I'm really very concerned over Kerry is literally talking about going head-to-head with the Russians, despite the clear, obvious warning of Russia's success in Syria versus that of the United States of America, the Donald Cook, and all of these other indicators saying this is not a smart thing to do. And again, I'm going to repeat what I said earlier in the show. If the United States government gets us into a war with Russia on the day when the U.S. government policymakers realize they cannot win it conventionally, that's when they're going to launch the nuclear weapons. And that's why we all have to stop this insanity over in Washington, D.C. before we all start glowing in the dark.
Yes, I'm into that.
Your next story, please.
Putin made the observation that the U.S. is using terrorists as a battering ram to overthrow disliked regimes. And this was at the 12th annual meeting entitled Societies Between War and Peace, Overcoming the Logic of Conflict in Tomorrow's World. Putin spoke to a number of international issues, including the ongoing war in Syria and the West's practices in the fight against Bashar al-Assad. And he made a very interesting statement, which to me sounds very true. And Mike, I'd like your feedback once I've said it. Success in fighting terrorists cannot be reached if using some of them as a battering ram to overthrow disliked regimes. It's just an illusion that they can be dealt with, removed later from power, and somehow negotiated with.
Well, he's bang on spot. We did talk about that earlier in the show. And again, the real danger is when the American people find out that the U.S. government has been this duplicitous, telling us all that Al-Qaeda and ISIS are horrible enemies and we have to spend our money and sacrifice our children's lives to defeat them, and then we find out ISIS and Al-Qaeda are being supported and armed by our government as a proxy in Syria and Iraq. Obviously the American people at that point have to say, I'm not going to be supportive or loyal or even recognize the legitimacy of a government that plays like this. And Putin is also right, because we have had these failures before where the U.S. will put in these terrorist groups to overthrow a government and then go on in and say, well, we're going to get rid of the terrorists because we want our people as the new government. And that hasn't really worked out all that well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a real crime. I wish we had a government that believed in good faith negotiations with which to resolve geopolitical differences. In my world, you stick the diplomats in a very lovely suite, make sure the plumbing is running, push food under the door, lock the door until they come out with a good faith negotiation.
The problem with all of that is compelling the member nations to keep those agreements. Look, we have the Minsk II agreement that Putin negotiated. Poroshenko immediately violated that. The U.S. has violated the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty with regard to Iran. The U.S. has completely walked away from the ABM Treaty. And the U.S. government has destroyed its own credibility, and that's part of the process that got us here. From the point of view of the U.S. government and Wall Street, they don't have a choice anymore. They've allowed our manufacturing to decline over the last 30 years. Nobody wants our agricultural product unless we force it on them at the point of a bayonet. All of these wars are about forcing the world back to using only the U.S. dollar for global trade and banking, from which the U.S. financial system will make interest payments and favorable trade agreements. And without that, if the world drops the U.S. dollar, there is nothing else to hold up the U.S. economy. It will implode and take the federal government with it.
Yeah, it's only a question of time.
Yes.
And although people have been saying, well, September or maybe October, I'm thinking that they're going to be able to push it on just a little bit further, maybe up until the end of the year. Mike, what do you think about that?
It's hard to pick a date because everybody who's out here trying to analyze what's going on, we're doing it on the basis of the existing rules, the existing conditions, the existing economy. The other side can change the rules. They have repeatedly all the time. They've got the printing presses. They can go on cranking out new money to cover their malfeasances until they deforest the entire planet. So it's really hard to hang a particular date with a high degree of confidence. But everybody understands it's coming at some point because the U.S. government will not make the major structural changes to our economy that could allow them to turn around and reverse course on this. And now that the U.S. government has lost the trust and faith of the American people, they wouldn't get any support for any attempt to try and revive our economy and our manufacturing. The American people are basically sitting and waiting for the U.S. government to collapse the way the Soviet Union did, and we're going to just start all over again and say, all right, Constitution, first 10 amendments, let's start building on that.
Yeah. And hopefully it will come with no violence, because violence is something that the government and its troops are trained to put down with extreme prejudice.
That's the one thing they're really, really good at is killing people. Let's not give them an excuse to do that.
No, definitely not.
All right, well, we got to take another break for commercials. I know we've got John in Barbados waiting on the phone. We're going to take his call as soon as we come back. Welcome back to the show, and yes, we were talking on the air during the bump music here, but we actually had somebody write in and complain they can't see Claire. So we're going to have to move her chair a little bit to the right here on the next commercial break. A very alert listener sent me an article saying that, in point of fact, no joking, there is a lead contamination problem in the water of Washington, D.C.
There's your problem.
There's your problem, because one of the symptoms of lead poisoning is aggressive behavior.
Yeah.
Oh boy, let's all buy a Brita water filtering pitcher or for the water filters that we advertise on our website and send it to your favorite Congress critter. We can save the world yet with clean water.
And also chelation therapy. Which is illegal in the United States, of course, because it works.
Because it actually works. If it actually worked, you have to ban it and keep us all going. Get your vaccines and stuff.
Yeah.
What is your next story?
Well, John McCain.
Insane McCain.
Yes. Leads the charge to cut soldiers' benefits. Money for terrorists, but not for our troops. And apparently, while lawmakers seem to have no problem finding funds for bombs, fighter jets, and terrorists in Syria and Iraq, it seems as though it is much more difficult for them to find money to pay American soldiers for their service and pay for their health care once that service is over.
Well, they're just supposed to do their patriotic duty and go off and die and stop being a burden on the government. We need that money to pay the hired mercenaries.
This is so immoral and cynical. And, folks, as I have said many times, as a Christian pacifist, I abhor war as an answer to a geopolitical problem. But our soldiers and our military deserve the best.
They do. Whether you agree with the wars or not, we have a debt of honor, if you will, to all those young people who put all on the uniform and did what they were told and carried out all of these very questionable wars. And we do owe them. We got to take care of them. You know, that's just beyond question at this point. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. John in Barbados, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Claire, and aloha, Michael. Thanks for having me on. I'm continuing on this very vein. I am detecting, if you like, some resistance and almost mutiny in the American military. The signs with messages like, I will not fight for Al-Qaeda, I will not be Al-Qaeda's Air Force, is appearing now all over the net by personnel, obviously covering their faces. There seems to be a lot of resistance to this effort, and there's a lot of resistance appearing as well in what they're saying is a continued jade helm. Now, I don't know what that means, but it's looking quite serious. I mean, the troops are obviously well aware that they're being asked to fight wars for the bankers and the money junkies, and it seems to be gaining credence within the ranks, and there's resistance forming. So, I mean, Obama, maybe he cannot rely on the blind obedience of the military anymore.
No, he can't, and that's something that they should be taking into factor. Mm-hmm. The story I had, remember that Fort Hood shooting that they blamed on this convenient Muslim guy? The story I had was that these soldiers had just returned from the war zone, thought they were being rotated out, their term of enlistment was over, were told, no, you're going back for another tour under stop loss, and they just freaked out and started shooting the officers. But they didn't, the White House obviously doesn't want the rest of the military to know that these mutinies are happening, so they blamed some Muslim guy for it and covered it all up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think this is going to be a trend that we're going to be seeing. We may not hear all that much about it. But, John, I think you are correct in your assessment that there is a lot more anger and a lot more awareness going on the part of our military about what these wars are really for.
Remember what Sun Tzu wrote in The Art of War. The side that feels they have the moral law on their side is the side that wins, and the U.S. government has blown that. Everybody serving in the military. I mean, there are still some in denial who want to say, we're right, they're wrong, they're Muslims, let's go kill them. But more and more, a large majority of the serving military understand these are not moral wars, they are not just wars, they are not defensive wars, they are not humanitarian wars, they are wars of outright conquest and invasion and theft of other people's property.
Well, what appears to be happening as well is there's an awareness that if they do go into these wars and they get badly injured, they're not going to be treated all that well.
They won't.
So there is a reluctance upon the part of the military now to take risks in theatre. You know, they're not willing to go really after ISIS because they may get shot down. You know, they're not really willing to go after ISIS on the ground with these special forces They're just putting trainers in there, and now they're disappearing since Russia came in.
Yeah, they're all hightailing it over the border into Turkey and Jordan.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, there's another aspect there, because remember, following the invasion of Iraq back in 2003, Donald Rumsfeld actually came out publicly complaining that too many soldiers were surviving their battlefield injuries and that this was just wrecking the bottom line on the budget they have drawn up for the conquest of Iraq. And so those people out there on the front lines have to be thinking, gee, what if they're sending us out in situations where, we either make it or we're killed outright just to save a few bucks on bandages, and that's going to be working against their enthusiasm.
Exactly. The enthusiasm to engage the enemy, or so-called enemy. But it's all psychology, and it seems to me that it's actually getting home now into the rank and file of the U.S. military that they may not be taking care of. That these things do have a psychological effect on the morale and the enthusiasm of the troops.
Oh, they absolutely do. I mean, look how many of the drone pilots are quitting. Mm-hmm. They understand they're committing war crimes. They're the ones who understand they were being told to target people just because they were taller than the average. And, it is working against them. If you don't think it's a just war, you're not going to get out there. You're not going to risk your life to make some banker rich somewhere. That is forcing the U.S. to go back and rely more and more on their high-tech wonder weapons, but that has limited value. You cannot control the ground without boots on the ground. You can't win a war from the air. That was the lesson in Vietnam. And Hitler's over-reliance on Germany's wonder weapons did not change the final outcome of World War II. A lot of people are saying that the U.S. is just like Nazi Germany just before World War II. We're actually closer to the end of that and making the same strategic mistakes that the Nazis did.
Yeah, and the thing that really sort of took me by surprise, if you like, was this lack of planning, strategic planning, particularly in the Middle East, where they've been playing games. They haven't really been going after what they say they're going after. The agenda is totally different to what's projected to the public.
Yeah, but see, the public now knows that, and that's why it's going to fail. Anyway, John, I need to let you go here. We're about ready to come up on a commercial break, and thank you for the phone call. We're going to go ahead and shut the phone lines for the rest of the show. And that's really where the U.S. agenda has failed, because they have lost that illusion that these wars are about bringing democracy to people, or humanitarian, or, they're an evil dictator with nuclear weapons or gassing their own people, and everybody now knows that's a lie. And soldiers are going to say, why should I fight for a lie? And the American people are going to say, why should I risk my children for a lie? Yeah. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our program. Last segment of the program today on this Kaahumanu Friday. And Claire, you had another story you wanted to share with us.
Yes, terrorist training in America. ISIS colonel was trained in quote-unquote counterterrorism by Blackwater and the U.S. State Department for 11 years. A former police commander from Tajikistan was featured in an ISIS video recently where he admitted that he was trained by the U.S. State Department and former military contractor Blackwater all the way up until last year. At a Blackwater training facility in North Carolina, Colonel Gumorad Kalimov received counterterrorism training, and this got confirmed by none less than the U.S. State Department. From 2003 to 2014, Colonel Kalimov participated in 5 counterterrorism training courses in the U.S. and Tajikistan through the Department of State's Diplomatic Security Anti-Terror Assistance Program.
Well, I don't care if it's anti-terror or not. What we have here is the U.S. government training and supporting ISIS leaders. And don't forget what happened with al-Baghdadi when he got hit in that convoy in Iraq, and he was wounded, and he's now in Turkey in the hospital being taken care of, and he was evacuated from Iraq to Turkey by the Central Intelligence Agency. Mm-hmm. When are you going to wake up and realize that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are completely bogus enemies manufactured by the U.S. government? Think 1984, think Emmanuel Goldstein. The government cannot rule you unless they've got an enemy to wag at you. And when they started this whole war on terror thing, Russia was still one of the good guys. They had to make up an enemy to scare you with, to get your money and your obedience and the lives of your children. This is it. I mean, how much more obvious do we have to make it?
Yeah. You know, when this is validated by the Department of State's Diplomatic Security Anti-Terrorism State Department spokesperson, I mean, how much more obvious can it get, folks?
Yeah, I mean, they're out there saying, yeah, we trained ISIS. Now you got to pay and send your kids to go get the people we trained and armed.
And, you know, all of these horrific videos that we have seen and the horrific treatment, that's your tax dollars at work, folks.
And most of those appear to be faked. I mean, they've got professional level equipment. You can tell looking at the video signals. Yeah. These are not cell phones. These are not even consumer level units. We're talking professional videography equipment and editing facilities to put these together. And always these videos are found by Rita Katz and Site Intelligence.
Surprise, surprise.
Rita Katz's father was executed as an Israeli spy. It's all smoke and mirrors to get you to go along with these wars of conquest. It's on the same moral level as the Gleiwitz incident, when Hitler sent his own people to attack the radio station in Gleiwitz, Germany, in order to frame the Poles for it, in order to launch a war of conquest. Or the Reichstag fire, or the Lusitania carrying weapons, or the torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, or the Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. How many more times are you going to have to be lied into a war until you realize that is how governments will trick you into war?
Yeah.
Without exception.
Yeah.
Now then, I want to make a comment. I was thinking about what John in Barbados was saying. And as you know, lately I've been talking a lot about the Stanley Milgram obedience experiments in the 1960s. There's a movie out on cable about them called Experimenter. And the movie itself is kind of lukewarm. It doesn't really build to a satisfying ending, but it does tell the story about these experiments, which were done in the context of their time, trying to figure out why so many German people just went along with what the Nazis were doing. And, of course, filmmakers missed an opportunity to extrapolate that to say, well, this also explains the Cambodians under Pol Pot, Russians under Stalin, and certainly the current crop of Americans underneath the neocon warhawks. And the lesson that came out of the Stanley Milgram experiments was ordinary, decent human beings will inflict pain on total strangers if some authority figure tells them it's necessary. And they got something like 70% of the people went all the way to the maximum pain, knowing it could possibly cause physical damage. And they did it because they were told to. Doesn't say much about human nature. We really are sheep underneath it all, for the most part. But, there's an important aspect you need to remember about the Stanley Milgram experiment. All of his subjects that were willing to push those buttons thought they were being told the truth by the experimenters, that it was necessary, that it was important work. When these subjects found out it was all a big lie, their reactions were quite a bit different here. And what John in Barbados mentioned shifts the balance. We may have a lot of military planners in the U.S. saying we can count on 70% of the American people in the military doing what they're told just because an authority figure tells them to do that. That only works if the American people and the rank-and-file military are believing that they are being told the truth by their high command. And that luxury is now gone, and it will change the Milgram factor, if you will.
People can no longer believe anything the government tells them. Occasionally they'll get the weather right, but that's about it, Mike.
We can still count on the sports scores.
Yes.
When the corporate media is out there with the sport scores, we can pretty much rely on those.
Yeah.
The rest of it,
Yeah, I know. It's a terrible place for someone who does care about their country very, very much and is trying in the most peaceful and logical way in the world to make changes, get people to listen. And I think that's really important as Rivero's Rangers goes out there and talks with the people they know and the people they feel might be open to looking. And please, folks, don't hit them with too much at a time, because that's going to be like a hit over the head and they're going to be unconscious.
Yeah, remember, people's beliefs form part of their identity, and that's intentional. so that, if you challenge their beliefs, it's perceived by the mind as a personal attack. And before we get to the end of the show, I want to talk about one other comment, patriotism. Because all the time I'm getting emails and in conversations about, you're not being patriotic. It's unpatriotic to question the government or doubt the government. And you need to remind them that the Founding Fathers defined patriotism as loyalty to one's country and fellow citizen, not to the government.
Yeah.
Thomas Paine wrote that your duty as a loyal American is to your fellow citizens against the government. I think it was Thomas Jefferson who said you should be loyal to your country and your fellow citizens at all times, but to the government only when it deserves it. I may be off on the attribution on that one, but it is the way we should be. Mm-hmm. Loyalty doesn't mean blind obedience to a government that has clearly stopped being loyal to us in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights.
And keeps lying to us.
All these people say, well, you obviously don't love America. No, I love America and I love Americans, okay? It's the government of Washington, D.C. that is the problem. It's just like the people who scream you're an anti-Semitic Jew hater. No, I don't care one way or the other. I don't have a problem with the people of Israel. I have a problem with the government of Israel, with the behavior of these very small groups of people who are out there causing so much misery for billions and billions of the Earth's population. That I have a problem with.
Yeah. So please be kind to yourselves. Be kind to the people around you. I know we're all under a lot of pressure. Economic pressure, emotional,
clenched hair.
Yeah, emotional and clenched hair. But just take the weekend, whatever you can do to kind of refresh. Just be kind to yourself and the people around you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, one more story that we're going to take to the top of the hour.
Okay.
WikiLeaks has started releasing a lot more information. And they have released information confirming what you and I have known all along. The Central Intelligence Agency does conduct operations on U.S. soil. Now, if you go over to the CIA's website, they will state that the CIA is prohibited under United States law from conducting any kind of spying operations on U.S. soil. It's actually supposed to be the jurisdiction of the FBI.
Yeah.
But we're finding out that the CIA does conduct operations on U.S. soil, spying and probably a lot worse things. Don't forget, the CIA has been setting up torture centers all over the globe. They could have been involved in Homan Square, these other black sites inside the U.S. So nobody in the government is playing by the rules any longer. The rules, that's just for you little people. Criminal charges, that's just for you little people, for you serfs, you slaves. It's not for people like Lois Lerner or Hillary Clinton.
Of course not.
Of course not. There's the music. Time for us to get out of here. Have yourself a really good weekend. We'll be back Monday here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices. Share what you know with everybody that you know. We are literally in a fight for the future of this nation. We'll be back Monday. Aloha, America.